Can anxious and avoidant ever work long-term? And what needs to change? Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern relationships, the anxious and avoidant attachment dance. It's messy, intense, confusing, and sometimes addictively painful. But here's the question that keeps so many people awake at night. Can an anxious and avoidant actually work long-term? Can two people who are biologically, emotionally, and psychologically wired so differently ever build something safe and lasting? The answer isn't simple, because while it is possible, it requires something most couples in this dynamic never realize. They're not just dealing with love, they're dealing with trauma colliding. Let's start with what this relationship really feels like. Imagine being an anxious partner. You crave closeness, reassurance, intimacy. You want to feel chosen, seen, and emotionally fed. Now enter the avoidant. They fear losing themselves, value space more than closeness, and interpret emotional needs as pressure. The anxious partner moves forward. The avoidant steps back. The closer one gets, the more the other pulls away. This is the classic push-pull dynamic, and it creates a looping emotional roller coaster that looks like passion, but underneath it is pure nervous system survival. But here's what most people don't understand. This dynamic isn't happening because either partner is broken. It's happening because both are protecting deep emotional wounds. The anxious person is often responding to early life experiences of inconsistency. Perhaps they had to work for love, prove themselves, or were abandoned emotionally. Meanwhile, the avoidant often grew up in environments where emotional vulnerability was unsafe, burdensome, or ignored altogether. So in adulthood, they fear intimacy will lead to being overwhelmed or controlled. Now the magic question, can it work? The short answer is yes, but not without radical awareness, deep healing, and mutual commitment to growth. And let's be very clear, it won't work if only one person does the inner work. It requires both partners to recognize the way their nervous systems react to closeness and distance, and to learn how to regulate together. Because otherwise, they're just triggering each other in an endless loop of protest and withdrawal. For the anxious partner, the key change is this. Stop personalizing the avoidance distance. Avoidance needs space. It's how they regulate their own nervous system. But the anxious partner often interprets that distance as rejection. This leads to protest behaviors, texting more, begging for attention, spiraling into fear. The transformation happens when the anxious partner builds internal security. That means learning to self-soothe, pausing before reacting, and grounding themselves in the reality that someone pulling back doesn't mean they're unlovable. It often means the other person is overwhelmed. Now for the avoidant partner. Their work is harder in a different way, because while anxious types feel everything loudly, avoidants are often emotionally shut down. Their healing begins with learning how to stay in discomfort, to not run, to resist the urge to retreat into their shell when emotions get intense. For the relationship to work, avoidants must learn the language of emotional presence. That means responding instead of withdrawing, communicating instead of disappearing. It means seeing connection not as a threat, but as a space for healing. But here's where things get hopeful. When these two types start doing the inner work, they can become incredibly healing for each other. The anxious partner, once they stop chasing, becomes softer and more grounded. They learn to hold space without grasping. And the avoidant, once they stop avoiding, starts showing up. They learn to feel without shutting down. And when both evolve like this, the bond becomes strong in a way that's deeply secure, because both people have faced their shadows and chosen to grow. However, to make that growth sustainable, boundaries are essential. Anxious partners often fear setting boundaries because they don't want to lose the connection. But without boundaries, the avoidant ends up feeling smothered, and the anxious person ends up feeling resentful. Boundaries actually protect love. They define the safe space where both people can exist as individuals and as a unit. The anxious partner needs to say, "I need regular communication to feel emotionally safe." The avoidant partner needs to say, "I need space to process my emotions." And both have to agree that these needs aren't attacks. They're invitations to connection. Another big shift, understanding triggers. Triggers are inevitable in this dynamic. The anxious person will be triggered by silence. The avoidant will be triggered by intensity. But instead of reacting, both partners can learn to name the trigger and work through it. Imagine if instead of texting 10 times when the avoidant pulls away, the anxious partner says, "I feel abandoned, and I know that's my wound. I need reassurance, but I'm giving you space." That's healing. Or imagine if the avoidant, instead of ghosting during conflict, says, "I feel overwhelmed right now, but I'm not leaving. I just need time to regulate." That's transformation. Let's also talk about communication, because it's everything in this relationship. These two types often speak different emotional languages. The anxious partner speaks in feelings. The avoidant speaks in logic. So when the anxious says, "I don't feel loved," the avoidant hears, "You're doing something wrong," and shuts down. The breakthrough happens when both learn how to translate. The anxious partner must express feelings without blaming, and the avoidant must learn to hear emotions without seeing them as criticism. For example, instead of saying, "You don't care about me," the anxious partner might say, "When I don't hear from you, my old wounds get activated." That invites understanding instead of defensiveness. Now let's talk about what happens over time. Even if both people do the work, the road isn't linear. There will be setbacks. The avoidant will still sometimes pull away. The anxious will still sometimes overreach. But the difference is this: with awareness, those moments become invitations instead of threats. They become moments to practice love, not run from it. Because in the end, that's the real test of long-term compatibility. Not whether you avoid conflict, but whether you repair after it. So can an anxious and avoidant make it work? Yes, but not if they stay in survival mode. Not if they keep trying to win, prove, or run. The anxious partner must stop needing the avoidant to complete them. And the avoidant must stop seeing independence as the only path to safety. True intimacy requires interdependence. Two whole people, aware of their wounds, committed to healing together. That's what makes love last. Not perfect alignment, but mutual evolution. And one more thing. Don't let the label define your fate. Attachment styles are not life sentences. They are starting points. With therapy, reflection, patience, and sometimes separation to grow individually, both anxious and avoidant people can move towards secure attachment. You don't have to be stuck in the cycle, but it takes both people wanting to break the pattern, not just with words, but with action. So if you're in this dynamic right now, ask yourself, am I willing to grow even if my partner isn't? Can I love without losing myself? Can I regulate when they pull back? Can I speak up when I feel dismissed? These are the questions that build the bridge. And if you're the avoidant watching this, can you face your own fear of closeness, knowing that your distance might be breaking the heart of someone who just wants to love you? That's your work. That's your healing. Because yes, anxious and avoidant love can survive, but not as it is. Only as it becomes, when both hearts stop protecting and start connecting.